Every night, for 20 years, I closed my eyes, believing I was safe in the comfort of my home. Little did I know that each sip of that tea was the beginning of a humiliation that happened right before my half-closed eyes. Good day, my dears. My name is Nancy Oliver Smith. I'm 77 years old, and today I'm going to share with you a story I've kept silent about for decades. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you who are watching now to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm curious to know where you're watching from, so please leave the name of your city in the comments. I was born in 1948 in a small town in rural Virginia, one of those towns where everyone knows each other, where doors are rarely locked, and where secrets, no matter how deep, always find a crack to escape through. Or at least, that's what I believed. I met William when I was only 18. He came to our town to work as a pharmacist, an educated man, 10 years older than me, with a calm manner and a smile that conveyed confidence. My parents adored him right away. A man with a future, they said. In 1966, we married in a simple but beautiful ceremony. I remember my white dress with small flowers hand-embroidered by my mother, and William's gaze when he said, "I do." At the time, I interpreted it as love. Today I know it was satisfaction at having gotten what he wanted. The first years were peaceful. William was respected in the community, the pharmacy prospered, and I took care of our home with dedication. We didn't have children, something that saddened me. But William always said we were complete with each other. "We're a family, Nancy. You and I, it's all we need." It was around our 5th wedding anniversary that I began having trouble sleeping. Nothing serious at first, just difficulty falling asleep. Some restless nights. William seemed extremely concerned, more than I was myself. "A wife who doesn't sleep well can't properly take care of the home," he would say with that tone of concern that I now recognize as the first sign of control. One night in April 1971, William presented what he called the perfect solution to my sleep problems. A special tea prepared with medicinal herbs that he personally selected from the pharmacy. "Trust me, Nancy. I'm a pharmacist. I know what I'm doing," he said, handing me the first cup of that brownish liquid that would play such a dark role in my life for the next 20 years. The taste was bitter, but William always added honey. At first, I only took it when insomnia was really bothering me. Soon, it became a daily ritual. "Better to prevent than to cure," William insisted, practically placing the cup in my hands every night, precisely at 9 o'clock. "Drink it all, dear, to the last drop." The effects were strange from the beginning. It wasn't like falling asleep naturally. It was as if a heavy fog descended upon me, making my body heavy, unable to move properly. But my mind remained partially awake, floating in a kind of limbo between consciousness and sleep. At the time, I thought it was just the normal effect of a sleep medication. It was on one of those nights, perhaps 6 months after starting the tea, that I had my first strange experience, as I called it. I vaguely remember hearing voices in the living room, muffled laughter, the sound of glasses clinking. In the morning, I mentioned this to William. He smiled in that reassuring way and said, "They were just dreams, my dear. The tea sometimes causes vivid dreams. Don't worry." And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, the man to whom I had entrusted my life, my future, the man who swore to protect and love me until death parted us. How could I imagine that each cup of that tea was a calculated dose of betrayal? The strange experiences became more frequent, shadows passing through the bedroom while I was in that semi-conscious state, whispered conversations that I couldn't fully comprehend. Sometimes I had the sensation of being in different places in the house, on the living room sofa, when I was certain I had fallen asleep in bed. Whenever I questioned William, the answer was the same. "They're just dreams, Nancy." Actually, I'm getting worried about these episodes of confusion. Perhaps we need to increase your tea dosage. And so, gradually, the doses increased, and with them, my ability to distinguish between reality and what William called dreams diminished. I began to doubt my own perceptions. Was I really hearing those voices? Was I really seeing lights on in the middle of the night? William began to comment with concern about my mental state when we were with friends or family. "Nancy has been confused lately," he would say, with that tone of a dedicated and concerned husband. "The doctors say it could be stress, but I'm keeping an eye on her." Thus, without realizing it, I became a prisoner in my own home, in my own body. During the day, I was the same Nancy as always. I took care of the house, did the shopping, chatted with neighbors. At night, after that ritual of the cup of tea, I transformed into a kind of conscious ghost, wandering among fragments of memories that I couldn't fully piece together the following morning. It was in 1975 that I noticed the first concrete signs that something beyond my confused dreams was happening. A different perfume on the sheets, a lipstick that wasn't mine forgotten in the bathroom, lipstick marks on the collar of William's shirt. When confronted, he always had perfectly plausible explanations. "It must be from Mrs. Thompson at the pharmacy. She always wears strong perfume when she comes to pick up medications." Or, "That lipstick was a free sample I received at the lab. I thought about giving it to you as a gift." And I accepted. Part of me wanted to believe. Part of me was already so confused with that blurry boundary between reality and dreams that I could no longer trust my own instincts. William was a master at making me doubt myself. "Are you imagining things again, Nancy? Remember what the doctor said about these episodes of paranoia?" Doctor? What doctor? I didn't remember consulting any doctor about episodes of paranoia, but William insisted that yes, I had gone to consultations and simply didn't remember correctly. And so, another layer of doubt accumulated on my already fragile confidence in my own memories. The years passed this way, an endless cycle of foggy nights and confused mornings. I became increasingly isolated. The friends I had gradually drifted away. "William told us about your condition," they would say with pitying looks. "We don't want to overwhelm you with visits." My family, who lived in another state, received letters written by William, supposedly dictated by me, telling them how delicate my health was and that I preferred not to receive visits for now. Gradually, my world reduced to that house and the omnipresent figure of William, my husband, my caretaker, my jailer. I didn't realize it, but the chains that bound me were made of doubts, fear, and that bitter tea that I continued to faithfully drink every night. William's pharmacy thrived. He hired more employees, expanded the business, began making deliveries to neighboring towns, which justified his occasional absences during the day. At night, however, he was always at home, punctually preparing my tea. "It's the most important moment of my day," he would say, watching me drink to the last drop. "Knowing that you'll rest peacefully brings me peace." Peace? What an ironic word to describe what happened in that house when my eyes closed. But my mind remained vaguely conscious, floating in that cruel limbo between sleep and wakefulness. A limbo where shadows moved, voices whispered, and laughter echoed. A limbo that for 20 long years was my nightly prison. If I could go back in time and say something to the young 23-year-old Nancy who accepted that first cup of tea, I would say just one thing. Trust your instinct. If something seems wrong, it probably is. But I can't go back. I can only tell my story in the hope that other women will listen to their instinct before it's too late. And that's how my 20-year nightmare began. A nightmare that I lived with half-closed eyes, night after night, while the life I thought I had unfolded in secret right in front of me. It was on a rainy Wednesday in June 1991 that my life began to change. 20 years had passed since the first cup of that tea. 20 years of foggy nights and confused mornings. I was already 53 years old, and the nightly tea routine was as much a part of my life as breathing. That morning, I woke up feeling a strange pain in my hip. I couldn't get up properly, and William, always attentive, called Dr. Parker, our family doctor, who had been treating us for years. The diagnosis was a fall that I didn't remember having. "It probably happened during one of your nighttime episodes, Mrs. Smith," explained the doctor, exchanging meaningful glances with William. Nothing serious, but you'll need absolute rest for a few weeks. What seemed like a misfortune ended up being the first ray of light in 2 decades of darkness. With the fall, I was admitted to the small-town hospital for observation. For the first time in 20 years, I spent consecutive nights without taking William's tea. In the first few days, I felt strange, restless. My body seemed to be demanding something it wasn't receiving. I sweated during the night, had vivid nightmares. Nurse Joy, a lady with gentle hands and attentive eyes, noticed my discomfort. "It seems like you're going through a kind of withdrawal, Mrs. Smith," she commented while adjusting my pillows on the 3rd night. "Your husband mentioned that you take a calming tea every night. He even brought some for us to continue giving you here." I looked at the small table beside the bed, and there it was. The same porcelain teapot that William used at home with that brownish liquid that had governed my nights for so long. "You know, Mrs. Smith," continued Joy, lowering her voice, "as a nurse, I'm always suspicious of home remedies that cause such dependence. If you want, I can say you took it, but throw it away just to see how you feel without it for a night." I hesitated. The idea of not taking the tea caused an almost physical anxiety. What if the nightmares got worse? What if William found out? But there was something in that nurse's eyes, a genuine concern that I hadn't seen directed at me for so long. "All right," I whispered, feeling as if I were committing some sort of betrayal. That night was difficult. I sweated, trembled, woke up several times, but the next morning, something was different. My mind seemed clearer, as if a fog I didn't even know existed was beginning to dissipate. "How do you feel today?" asked Joy as she entered the room with breakfast. "Strange," I replied honestly, as if I were waking up from a very long sleep. She smiled. "Sometimes we need to stop certain things to realize the effect they have on us." In the following nights, we continued with our little secret. William came to visit me every day, always asking if I was taking the tea regularly. I lied, feeling a mixture of guilt and a strange sense of freedom. After 2 weeks in the hospital, my mind was clearer than it had been in years. Memories began to return. Not just confused fragments, but complete memories of the strange experiences I had during those nights under the effect of the tea. I remembered sitting in the living room armchair, unable to move properly, while I heard William animatedly conversing with someone in the kitchen. I remembered shadows passing by me, muffled laughter, conversations that abruptly ceased when I tried to focus my clouded gaze on the figures moving around the house. One memory in particular became painfully clear. It was on a wedding anniversary night, perhaps our 15th. William had served me an extra-large dose of the tea, saying it was a special occasion. I remembered being in the living room armchair, partially conscious, while William opened an expensive bottle of wine at the dining table. Except we weren't dining together. There was a woman sitting at the table with him, a red-haired woman who laughed loudly and toasted with my husband while I watched motionless from the shadows of the living room. "Won't she wake up?" the woman asked, glancing in my direction. "She never wakes up," William replied with a confidence that only comes from experience. "You can speak normally. She only hears murmurs, sees only shadows. Tomorrow she'll think she dreamed it, if she remembers anything at all." The cruelty of that scene hit me with the force of a train. It wasn't just betrayal, it was deliberate, calculated humiliation. William not only cheated on me, but made sure that I was present, semi-conscious, witnessing my own degradation, unable to react. When I was discharged from the hospital 3 weeks after the fall, I was a different woman. My mind was clear, my suspicions confirmed by my own recovered memories. But I knew I had to be cautious. If William suspected that I had stopped taking the tea, that I was connecting the dots of 2 decades of manipulation, I would be in danger. So, I began my own act. Every night I accepted the tea that he prepared punctually. I smiled, thanked him for his care, drank under his watchful eye. As soon as he turned away, I poured the liquid into the plant next to my armchair or hid it in a small flask that I kept in my robe pocket. I pretended the effects he expected to see. Heavy eyes, slow movements, mumbled responses. And then, when William thought I was in the usual state of semi-consciousness, I observed. With eyes wide open in the darkness, I saw how it really had been for the last 20 years. It didn't take long to confirm my suspicions. 3 nights after my return from the hospital, I saw William checking my state, passing his hand in front of my face to confirm that I was under the effect. Satisfied, he picked up the phone and made a call. "You can come," he said in a low voice. "She's already taken the dose. She's in the usual place." 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang softly. William opened the door, and there she was, the red-haired woman from my recovered memories. Older now, like all of us, but unmistakable. Vivian. He greeted her with a kiss that spoke of long-established intimacy. "Missed me?" "3 weeks is a long time, William," she replied, entering the house as someone who knows the way well. Her eyes met mine, half-closed, as I had learned to keep them to sustain the farce. "She's in the usual place, like a piece of furniture." The cruelty of that comment made my blood boil, but I maintained the vacant expression. Years of being treated as an object had taught me something useful, after all: how to appear absent while observing everything. That night, I witnessed the routine that apparently had been happening in my house for years. William and Vivian dined at the table I had set earlier. They used our best glasses, the fine china we rarely used. They chatted animatedly about people I didn't know, plans that didn't include my conscious participation. "When are we going to finalize the preparations for Canada?" asked Vivian between sips of wine. "Soon," replied William. "The buyer for the pharmacy is already arranged. The house is almost ready to be put up for sale. We just need to resolve the Nancy issue." My heart froze. The Nancy issue. That's how my husband of 25 years referred to me, as an issue to be resolved. "Has Dr. Parker already signed the internment papers?" asked Vivian, and her casual tone when discussing my fate made my stomach turn. "Almost everything is ready," replied William. "With the reports from the last few years documenting her mental condition, it will be easy to get compulsory internment. Once she's in the facility, I can assume total control of the assets as legal guardian, sell everything, and leave. She'll be well taken care of there, I'm sure." 20 years is too long to maintain a plan like this, commented Vivian, serving herself more wine. "You're patient, William. I've always admired that about you." He smiled, that same smile that I once found charming. "Patience brings rewards, my dear. When we met, I had nothing. The pharmacy was small. This house was still in her parents' name. Now we have everything. The expanded pharmacy, properties in other towns, overseas accounts, and all of this without raising suspicions. A divorce would have cost me half of everything. This way, I get everything and still appear to be the devoted husband who took care of his mentally unstable wife until he couldn't anymore." The shock of that revelation almost made me lose my composure. 20 years of manipulation, not just to hide an affair, but as part of a meticulous plan to steal my life, my sanity, and my assets. The cold calculation with which they discussed my future in a psychiatric institution, as if they were talking about the fate of an inconvenient pet, revealed a cruelty that I could never have imagined possible in the man with whom I had shared my life. I continued my act that night and in the following ones. I observed patterns, listened to conversations, pieced together the puzzle that was my own life. I discovered that Vivian was not a recent figure. She had been present from the beginning, from before the tea. She was a technician in the laboratory that supplied medications to William's pharmacy. It was she who helped him formulate the cocktail of sedatives that he gave me disguised as medicinal tea. Together, they had planned each step of my slow disappearance from my own life. Even more frightening, I discovered that I was not their first victim. Through fragmented conversations that I heard during those nights of disguised vigilance, I understood that Vivian had been married before. Her husband, a rich and older man, had tragically died after years suffering from a mysterious neurological disease. The fortune he left financed the initial expansion of William's pharmacy, the beginning of his empire built on manipulated and destroyed lives. During those nights of discoveries, I fought against the urge to confront them, to scream out all my anger accumulated over 2 decades of deception. But I knew it would be dangerous. They had invested too much time in this plan to let me ruin it simply by waking up from the induced stupor. If they knew I was conscious, that I knew their plan, my fate could be much worse than a psychiatric clinic. I needed a plan, I needed help, and above all, I needed evidence. Evidence that I wasn't crazy, that I had been deliberately drugged and manipulated for years by the man who swore to protect me. The opportunity arose when I discovered, overhearing a conversation between William and Vivian, that they were planning a 3-day trip to finalize the purchase of a house in Canada, where they intended to restart their lives after getting rid of me. It would be my chance. 3 days without William, 3 days to seek help and gather evidence. While waiting for those days to arrive, I continued my act of the docile and confused wife. During the day, I was careful not to show the mental clarity I had recovered. I committed small, calculated slips, forgot where I had put things, confused dates, stared vacantly into nothing when William spoke to me. He interpreted these signs as the progression of my supposed mental condition, exactly as I wanted him to think. At night, I continued pretending to drink the tea, pretending to fall into that state of semi-consciousness while I observed and planned. Each false smile, each look of concern that William directed at me now provoked a mixture of nausea and determination. How could I not have seen the falsity for so long? How did I trust so blindly in someone capable of such cruelty? But it wasn't time for recriminations. It was time for survival. And for the first time in 20 years, I was completely awake, with a clear mind and a single goal: to recover my life and my dignity. Finally, the day arrived when William announced his trip. It was a Sunday morning in July 1991. He packed a small suitcase, explaining that he needed to visit a supplier in Boston to negotiate new medications for the pharmacy. The lie came so naturally from his lips that if I didn't know the truth, I would have believed without hesitation. "It will be just 3 days, dear," he said, adjusting his shirt collar in front of the mirror. "I've already spoken with Mrs. Jenkins to come stay with you. She'll sleep in the guest room and prepare your meals. And don't worry about the tea. I've left several doses ready in the refrigerator with clear instructions on how to heat them." I played my part as the confused and dependent wife, furrowing my brow as if trying to process information too complex for my debilitated mind. "You will come back, won't you?" I asked with a trembling voice, playing the role he expected of me. William smiled with that false sweetness that now gave me chills. He approached, caressed my face like someone petting a docile pet. "Of course I'll come back, Nancy. I always come back, don't I? I've taken care of you for so many years. I would never abandon you." The irony of those words almost made me choke. He was planning exactly that, to abandon me in a psychiatric institution while fleeing to Canada with my rival and my money. But I swallowed the outrage and smiled feebly, lowering my eyes, as I had learned to do to appear submissive. After William left, Mrs. Jenkins arrived, a lady in her early 60s who occasionally helped with the house cleaning. She knew about my supposed mental condition and treated me with that irritating condescension reserved for small children or people considered incapable. "Now let's have lunch, Mrs. Smith. Your husband left everything organized for you. What a dedicated man. Not everyone is that lucky." I continued my act throughout the first day. I ate docilely, watched television with a vacant look. I took a bath under Mrs. Jenkins's discreet supervision, who stayed outside the bathroom, asking every 5 minutes if I was okay. At night, I pretended to drink the tea that she heated according to William's instructions, discreetly pouring it into the plant when she turned to put away the teapot. I dragged myself to bed as if I were under the effect of the sedative. I murmured good night and lay there, breathing deeply until I heard Mrs. Jenkins retire to the guest room. I waited another hour, counting the minutes on the digital clock beside the bed before silently getting up. This would be my first night of true freedom in 2 decades, and I would use it well. With light steps, I went to William's office at the end of the corridor. The door was locked, as expected, but in the last few weeks, I had carefully observed where he kept the key in a small box on top of the kitchen cabinet, disguised as an ornament. With the key in hand, I opened the office door and entered the command center of my own prison. I turned on only the small desk lamp to avoid drawing attention and began my search. The office was meticulously organized, reflecting William's calculating mind. Labeled drawers, colored folders, everything in its proper place. I started with the drawer marked as personal, an almost ironic designation, considering that nothing related to William was truly personal. Everything was calculated, planned. Inside, I found a red folder with my name. I opened it with trembling hands and encountered the documentation of my own life, or rather, the fiction that William had created about my life. There were medical reports dating from the first years after the beginning of the treatment with the tea, psychiatric reports signed by Dr. Parker, describing a progressive mental deterioration that never existed. Photographs of me in a semi-conscious state, clearly taken without my knowledge, catalogued by date, as if they were evidence of some macabre experiment. One document in particular caught my attention. A request for compulsory internment in a psychiatric clinic in Richmond, dated the previous week, missing only a final signature from Dr. Parker. The form described me as a patient with an advanced case of early dementia, with episodes of aggression and self-harm, incapable of taking care of myself. It was so absurdly false that it would be comical, were it not for the fact that it almost worked. My hands trembled with anger as I leafed through those documents, but I forced myself to stay calm. It wasn't time for emotions, it was time for action. Using the small photocopier that William kept in the office for pharmacy documents, I began to make copies of everything I found. Each false report, each forged document, each photograph taken without consent. Everything would be evidence of the conspiracy against me. In another drawer, I found something even more disturbing. A diary. Not my diary, although it talked about me in practically every page. It was William's diary, where he coldly documented the progress of his plan over the years. Day 348 of treatment, said an entry from 1972. Increased the dose by 5 milligrams. Nancy showed significant disorientation in the morning, with no memory of having heard Vivian in the house. Satisfactory progress. Year 5, said another entry. Dr. Parker agreed to provide the necessary reports in exchange for 15% of the pharmacy. An expensive investment, but necessary for official documentation. Year 12, further ahead. Nancy almost saw Vivian today. We need to be more careful. I increased the nightly dose and added a component to affect short-term memory. Possible side effects, but the risk is acceptable considering how much we've already invested. I photocopied page after page of that macabre diary, feeling a mixture of horror and validation. I wasn't crazy. I was never crazy. I was the victim of a meticulous conspiracy perpetrated by the man I trusted most in the world. In a folder marked Canada, I found the final confirmation of the escape plans, documents for the purchase of a house in Vancouver, airline tickets in the names of William and Vivian Smith. When did they get married? Was Smith her last name or a pseudonym for their new life? Bank transfers to overseas accounts, money that, from what I could understand from the documents, came largely from the gradual sale of properties I had inherited from my parents. While I photocopied those documents, a cruel reality formed with crystal clarity. It wasn't just my sanity that William had stolen during 20 years. It was my entire existence. My past through the manipulation of my memories, my present through chemical control over my body and mind. And now he was trying to steal my future with this internment plan. But no more. Not now that I knew, not now that I was awake. I finished making the copies and carefully organized them in a folder that I hid inside the lining of an old coat at the back of the closet. a coat that William would never notice, since for years he had even chosen my clothes. I returned the originals exactly as I had found them, attentive to every detail, so he wouldn't notice that his sanctuary had been violated. On the second day of William's absence, I maintained my pretended routine of a mentally debilitated woman, but prepared the next step of my plan. When Mrs. Jenkins went out to buy bread at the corner bakery, I made a quick call to the only person I thought could help me, my niece Jennifer, my younger sister's daughter. Jennifer was a lawyer in Richmond, and although we hadn't spoken for years, another result of the isolation imposed by William, we maintained contact through rare birthday and Christmas cards. Cards that I later realized were probably intercepted and answered by William in my name. "Hello, Jennifer, it's your Aunt Nancy," I said quickly on the phone. "Aunt Nancy, what a surprise. Uncle William finally let you use the phone?" The bitterness in her voice confirmed my suspicions. She had her doubts about my isolation. "Jennifer, listen carefully. I don't have much time. I need your help as a lawyer. I'm in danger." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Aunt, are you okay? Your voice sounds different but firm." "I'm lucid for the first time in 20 years, dear. William has been drugging me all this time. He plans to have me permanently committed to take my assets. I have evidence, but I need legal help to use it." Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear the gears of Jennifer's legal mind processing what she had just heard. "Where is he now?" she finally asked, her professional tone replacing the initial surprise. "He traveled for 3 days, supposedly on business, but in reality, he went to finalize the preparations to flee with his mistress. Can you come to Richmond?" "Not alone. He has a woman watching me, and I don't have access to money or documents." "I understand. I'll come to you. I'll arrive tomorrow morning. Don't do anything that might raise suspicions until then. Continue acting normally." "Thank you, Jennifer," I whispered, hearing the noise of the front door. Mrs. Jenkins was returning. "See you tomorrow." I hung up quickly and returned to my post in the living room armchair, resuming my vacant and confused expression at the exact moment Mrs. Jenkins entered, carrying the bag of bread. That was the longest night of my life. Each minute seemed to drag on as I pretended to sleep, knowing that the following morning could mark the beginning of my freedom or the devastating failure of my plan. If William returned earlier than expected, if Jennifer couldn't arrive, if the evidence I gathered wasn't sufficient. So many possibilities, so many risks. On the morning of the third day, I woke up to the sound of the doorbell. From my bedroom, I heard Mrs. Jenkins answer the door, and Jennifer's voice, more mature than I remembered, but unmistakably hers. "Good morning. I came to visit my Aunt Nancy. I'm Jennifer, her niece." "Ah, the lawyer from Richmond," exclaimed Mrs. Jenkins. "I didn't know you were coming. Mr. Smith didn't mention anything." "It was a last-minute decision," replied Jennifer with a firmness that filled me with pride. "I had a professional commitment in the area and took the opportunity to visit my aunt. Is there a problem?" No. It's just that Mr. Smith always prefers to be notified of visits due to Mrs. Smith's condition. You know. But since he's not here, I presume there's no problem in seeing my own aunt." I heard the footsteps approaching the bedroom and prepared myself. When the door opened and Jennifer entered, followed closely by a visibly uncomfortable Mrs. Jenkins, I needed all my willpower to maintain the farce. I looked at my niece with purposely unfocused eyes, as if I didn't completely recognize her. "Hello, Auntie," said Jennifer gently, approaching the bed. "How are you feeling today?" "Jennifer?" I murmured, as if trying to remember. "My Jennifer, you've grown so much." "Yes, it's me." She sat beside me on the bed, taking my hand. Then, turning to Mrs. Jenkins, she added, "Could you give us a moment alone? Family matters." Mrs. Jenkins hesitated, but Jennifer's natural authority prevailed. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me," she said, reluctantly withdrawing. As soon as the door closed, I squeezed Jennifer's hand tightly. "Thank you for coming," I whispered, my voice now firm and clear. We don't have much time. Jennifer's eyes widened at hearing the transformation in my voice and posture. My God, Aunt, it's true. Then you really are perfectly lucid? Yes, and ready to reclaim my life. I got up from the bed with an energy that surprised even myself. The evidence is hidden in the lining of the brown coat at the back of the closet. I brought the documentation I mentioned. Jennifer nodded, still processing the dramatic change in the aunt she had believed for years to be lost in mental confusion. I brought everything: the power of attorney, the request for a protective order, the preliminary criminal complaint. We just need your evidence and signature. While Jennifer took the documents from the folder, I retrieved the package of copies from my hiding place. Together, we sat on the bed and reviewed each document, each falsified report, each entry of the macabre diary, assembling the puzzle of the conspiracy that had consumed 20 years of my life. This is monstrous, murmured Jennifer, leafing through the evidence. They documented everything as if it were some kind of perverse experiment. And this doctor? Parker, falsifying medical reports, he could lose his license forever. And he will, I affirmed, with a determination I hadn't felt in decades. They will all pay for what they did. I signed the documents that Jennifer brought. The power of attorney, giving her powers to act in my name, the detailed statement of the abuse suffered, the request for protection against William. Each signature was an act of liberation, each written word a brick in the reconstruction of my autonomy. Now we need to get out of here, said Jennifer, putting away the signed documents. I'm going to take you to Richmond today. Are you willing to leave everything behind? I looked around the bedroom that had been my prison for so long, the walls that had witnessed my slow disappearance, the familiar objects that had been the setting of my humiliation. I'm not leaving anything behind, I replied firmly. I'm leaving a prison. My life, my true life, is ahead of me, not here. With Jennifer's help, I quickly packed a small suitcase with just the essentials. I didn't want to take anything that reminded me of my life with William. When we were ready to leave, Mrs. Jenkins appeared at the bedroom door, her eyes wide with surprise at seeing me dressed and ready, a suitcase by my side. Mrs. Smith, what's happening? You can't leave like this. Mr. Smith, Mr. Smith no longer has authority over my aunt, interrupted Jennifer, her professional tone leaving no room for arguments. I have legal documentation here that proves abuse and coercion. My aunt is under my protection from now on, by a determination that will be judicially ratified. Mrs. Jenkins paled, her gaze jumping from me to Jennifer and back to me. But her condition, the medicines. There is no condition, I replied, looking her directly in the eyes for the first time in years. There never was, just a cruel man drugging me to control my life and my assets. And it's over. We passed by her towards the front door, leaving her standing with her mouth open in the corridor. As I crossed the threshold for the last time, I felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Outside, the July sun never seemed so bright, the air never so sweet. In Jennifer's car, as we moved away from that house of horrors, I allowed myself something that I hadn't fully done in 20 years. I smiled, a genuine smile, not rehearsed, not calculated to appear docile or confused. A smile of a free woman. To Richmond, then? Asked Jennifer, looking at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. To the beginning of my new life, I replied, looking forward, only forward, and to the end of theirs. The sun rose timidly on that first morning in Richmond. I woke up disoriented in the guest room of Jennifer's apartment, momentarily confused about where I was. For 20 years, I had opened my eyes to the same walls, the same window, the same ceiling. Now everything was different, everything was new, everything was mine. That first week was a whirlwind. Jennifer, with her efficiency as an experienced lawyer, put the judicial machine in motion immediately. On the same day we arrived, she presented the documents to the duty judge requesting emergency protection measures against William. The copies of the diaries, the false medical reports, the unauthorized photographs, everything transformed into compelling evidence of 2 decades of systematic abuse. I remember sitting before a female detective at the women's unit, something that didn't even exist when I began taking that cursed tea. The detective, a middle-aged woman with kind but determined eyes, listened to my account with an attention that made me feel truly seen for the first time in years. "Mrs. Smith," she said, after I finished my narrative, "what Mr. Smith did constitute several crimes: psychological false imprisonment, non-consensual administration of substances, psychological and financial violence, and possibly even attempted homicide, considering the risks of the medications he administered without proper medical supervision." Those words, imprisonment, crime, violence, fell upon me with the weight of truth. For so long, I had normalized what was happening, even after discovering the betrayal. Only there, sitting in that cold police station, did I truly comprehend the dimension of what I had suffered. "We're going to issue a preventive arrest warrant," continued the detective. "He won't be able to approach you or attempt contact. The pharmacy and assets will be frozen while the process runs its course." 3 days after our arrival in Richmond, I received the news. William had returned to our house and, not finding me there, contacted the police to report my disappearance. The irony was almost comical. The man who had planned to make me disappear into a psychiatric institution was now showing concern for my whereabouts. When the police informed him about the accusations against him and presented the arrest warrant, William tried to flee. He was captured at the bus station with tickets to New York and a suitcase containing almost $100,000 in cash. Vivian wasn't with him. She had disappeared, probably alerted somehow about the situation. August 1991 arrived with an avalanche of legal procedures, testimonies, hearings, medical examinations that confirmed I didn't suffer from any mental condition. Dr. Parker, confronted with the evidence of falsification of medical reports, initially tried to deny everything. When we presented the entries from William's diary mentioning the financial agreement between them, he crumbled and confessed, begging for a judicial deal in exchange for testimony against William. It was during one of these hearings that I saw William for the first time since my escape. He was sitting on the other side of the room, handcuffed, wearing a gray prisoner's uniform. Our gazes crossed for a brief instant. His, full of hatred. Mine was something more complex. It wasn't exactly anger, although it was there. It was a kind of pity mixed with absolute indifference. That man no longer had power over me. September brought the news that Vivian had been located trying to cross the border into Canada. With her, the police found various documents, including the originals of some that I had photocopied that furtive night in William's office. Her capture completed the circle of justice that I hardly dared to dream of when I called Jennifer on that desperate day. It was also in September that I faced one of the most difficult moments of that period, the detailed toxicological examination. For weeks, doctors collected samples of my hair and tissues to determine exactly which substances William had administered to me over the years. The result was shocking, even to the specialists. "Mrs. Smith," explained the forensic doctor, "we found traces of at least 7 different substances in your system at concentrations that indicate continuous use for decades. Some are common sedatives, but others are experimental and potentially dangerous. It's frankly a miracle that you didn't develop permanent damage to your liver or kidneys." "A miracle," he said. I preferred to think it was determination. My body resisted because, at some deep level, it always knew that one day my mind would free itself from that chemical prison. In October, the judge issued the preliminary sentence. William was sentenced to 12 years in prison for multiple crimes. Doctor. Parker lost his medical license and received a reduced sentence of 4 years for his cooperation. Vivian, judged separately, received 8 years. The pharmacy and all assets were returned to my name. Justice, at last. But justice is not the same as healing. William's sentence didn't erase 20 years of manipulation and abuse. The return of my assets didn't fill the lost decades. I was free, yes, but I was also disoriented in a world that had changed drastically while I remained sedated in my own living room. I remember standing in front of an ATM, completely confused about how to operate it, being surprised by the cell phones that Jennifer and her friends used naturally, being startled by the noise and speed of everything after so much time living in an artificially silenced and slow world. It was during this period that I began to see a psychologist, Dr. Helen. Unlike Dr. Parker, she was genuinely dedicated to the mental health of her patients. With her help, I began the long process of reconnecting with my own identity. "Mrs. Smith," she told me in one of our first sessions, "you've lived an experience of extremely rare and prolonged depersonalization. We need to recover not only your memories and capabilities, but also your notion of who you are." Who was I? A seemingly simple question, but devastatingly complex for someone who had spent so much time being merely an object in another person's life. Before William, I was a merchant's daughter, a promising student, a young woman with dreams. During those 20 years, I was a kind of living doll, manipulated according to others' convenience. But now, who was the 53-year-old Nancy, suddenly liberated? The answer began to emerge in November 1991, when I finally felt strong enough to return to my hometown. Not to stay, I would never live in that house again, but to close a chapter. Jennifer accompanied me, protective as always. The town seemed smaller than I remembered, more worn by time. Neighbors looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and shame. Many of them had witnessed my induced decline without questioning, accepting William's convenient narrative about my supposed mental condition. Some approached, trying awkward explanations. "We never imagined Mrs. Smith. He seemed so dedicated." Others crossed the street to avoid meeting my gaze. The truth about what happened to me had spread like fire, transforming into the biggest scandal that small town had ever witnessed. I entered the house for the last time that November afternoon. The furniture was covered with white sheets. The house had been sealed as part of the investigation and only recently released. Each room held memories of humiliation and pain. The living room armchair where I spent countless nights in a state of semi-consciousness. The kitchen where William prepared his instrument of control in the form of tea. The bedroom we shared, where he slept next to a woman he kept prisoner. I walked through each space slowly, not out of nostalgia, but as a form of exorcism. Each step was a goodbye to a version of my life that I now recognized as a prison. When I reached the backyard, I stopped in front of the same plant where I had so many times poured the tea in the last days before my escape. Surprisingly, it had died, perhaps poisoned by the same components that should have destroyed me. "Let's put the house up for sale," I said to Jennifer as we left, "and the pharmacy too. I don't want anything that reminds me of this town." On the way back to Richmond, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. "I want to study," I announced to Jennifer's surprise, "psychology. I want to understand what happened to me. I want to help other women recognize signs that I didn't see." At 53 years old, with only a high school education interrupted by my early marriage to William, I knew the path would be arduous. But after overcoming 20 years of systematic abuse, no obstacle seemed insurmountable. January 1992 found me enrolled in a preparatory course for college entrance exams. I sat among teenagers who could have been my children or even grandchildren, absorbing knowledge that the world had produced while I was semi-conscious in my armchair. Physics, chemistry, biology, history, everything seemed new, fascinating, liberating. I studied with a veracity that surprised even myself. Each page turned, each concept understood was an act of rebellion against the 2 lost decades. My young colleagues initially looked at me with curiosity, then with respect, finally with admiration. The lady from the prep course, as they affectionately called me, became a kind of mascot and inspiration for the class. In July of that year, I sold the house and the pharmacy. The money, added to what we managed to recover from the accounts that William had opened overseas, guaranteed my financial independence. I bought a small apartment near the university and invested the rest with the help of a financial consultant recommended by Jennifer. December arrived with the entrance exam. I remember sitting in the examination room, hands slightly trembling, surrounded again by young people who were just beginning their lives. The essay prompt asked for a text about overcoming. I smiled internally. I had lived enough on that subject to write not just an essay, but an entire book. February 1993 brought the result. Accepted into psychology at Virginia Commonwealth University. Not in first place, but with a respectable score for someone who had been disconnected from the academic world for so long. Jennifer organized a small celebration party in her apartment. Between toasts and smiles, I felt something that I had forgotten what it was like, genuine pride in myself. University life was as challenging as it was liberating. Theories, debates, group work, everything demanded a mental and emotional presence that I was relearning to have. In the first semesters, I often wondered if I had made a mistake, if it wasn't too ambitious for a woman of my age and with my history to attempt an academic career. It was during a class on psychological trauma in the third semester that I found my true purpose. The professor was discussing cases of prolonged psychological manipulation and their effects on victims' identities. Sitting in the last row of the auditorium, I felt silent tears stream down my face as I recognized my own experience being given academic terms. After class, I approached the professor and for the first time since the beginning of college, shared my complete story with someone from the academic world. He listened in silence, occasionally taking notes. "Mrs. Smith," he said when I finished, "your experience is a unique case study on prolonged psychological abuse and chemical manipulation. Have you considered documenting your story for scientific purposes? It could help countless victims and professionals." That's how, at 55 years old, besides being a psychology student, I also became an object of study and eventually co-author of a scientific article about my own case. Chemical Imprisonment, a case study on psychological manipulation through inducing substances, was published in a respected academic journal in 1995, while I was still in the penultimate year of college. The article caught the attention of the scientific community and, more importantly, of organizations defending women's rights. I was invited to give lectures, participate in support groups, share my experience with other survivors of abuse. My story, previously a source of shame and confusion, transformed into a tool of awareness and hope. In December 1996, at 58 years old, I received my psychology degree with a specialization in trauma and recovery. In the graduation audience, besides Jennifer and some friends I had made during the course, there were 3 women who had contacted me after the publication of the article. All survivors of abusive relationships who found in my story the courage to seek help. That night, looking at my newly earned degree, I understood that the 20 years that William had tried to steal from me weren't completely lost. In some perverse and unexpected way, that terrible experience had given me a unique perspective, a deep understanding of human suffering, and the incredible capacity for recovery that we all possess. My true life wasn't in the past I lost, nor in the youth that was denied to me. It was there in the present that I built with my own hands, and in the future that was still to come. January 1997 marked the beginning of my professional career, a phrase I never imagined saying at 59 years of age. I rented a small office in a commercial building in downtown Richmond and put a discreet sign on the door. Nancy Smith, psychologist specialized in trauma and recovery. In the first month, I attended to only 3 patients. By the 6th month, my schedule was completely filled with a waiting list. My patients didn't come just because of my academic training or specialization. They came because, somehow, word had spread. That psychologist truly understands. She's been there. She survived. My story, initially documented only in academic circles, became a kind of urban legend among women seeking help to leave abusive relationships. I vividly remember my first patient, Teresa, a 40-year-old woman who had lived under the absolute control of her husband for 15 years. She entered my office with her head down, speaking in whispers, constantly apologizing for taking my time. I recognized in her the reflection of what I had been. The woman who doubts herself, who has lost the notion of her own boundaries, who believes she deserves the abuse she suffers. "How did you manage to leave?" she asked after several sessions, when we finally built enough trust to discuss my own experience. "How did you find the courage?" "It wasn't courage, Teresa," I replied honestly. "It was survival." There comes a moment when we realize that staying is more painful than the fear of leaving. Throughout that first year of practice, I attended to dozens of women like Teresa, some in situations similar to mine, others facing different forms of abuse, physical, financial, emotional. Each story was unique, but the underlying pattern was sadly familiar. People who gradually lost their autonomy, their voice, their identity. In 1998, I was invited to participate in a training program for detectives and police officers at the Women's Unit. My lectures combined technical knowledge about psychological trauma with the credibility of someone who lived the experience. Seeing those professionals taking notes while I explained the subtle signs of manipulation, the indicators of psychological abuse that so many professionals couldn't identify, gave me a sense of purpose that I had never experienced before. "If just one of you recognizes these signs in a victim seeking help," I said at the end of one of these lectures, "all the suffering I went through will have been worth it." In the same year, I received an unexpected phone call. A television producer had read my story and wanted to interview me for a documentary about domestic violence. My first instinct was to refuse. The idea of exposing my story to millions of strangers terrified me. But then I thought of all the women who might be watching, trapped in situations similar to what I lived through, not knowing there was a way out. "I accept," I replied after a long pause. "But I have one condition. I want the program to provide practical information on how to seek help, phone numbers, addresses of shelters, legal guidance. I don't just want to tell my story. I want to give tools to those who need them." The interview aired in prime time on a Sunday in September. Sitting in the studio under bright lights, I shared details of my experience that until then I had only discussed in therapeutic or academic contexts. I talked about the first signs I ignored, about how the manipulation was so gradual that I barely noticed being ensnared, about the 20 years of foggy consciousness and stolen dignity. In the weeks that followed, I received hundreds of letters and phone calls. Women who identified with my story, concerned family members with relatives in suspicious situations, health professionals who recognized similar cases among their patients. What had been my personal tragedy transformed into a catalyst for national awareness about a form of abuse rarely discussed openly. In 1999, with the support of an NGO for women's rights defense, I founded the Awakening Institute, a center for reception and specialized treatment for victims of prolonged psychological abuse. We started small with just 3 rented rooms and a team of volunteers, mostly students of psychology and social work. In our first year, we attended to 87 women. In the second year, more than 200. The institute grew rapidly. In 2001, we acquired our own headquarters, a spacious house donated by a businesswoman who had been a victim of abuse and identified with our cause. We expanded the services to include legal assistance, psychiatric follow-up, professional relocation workshops, and even temporary shelter for more urgent cases. In 2003, at 65 years old, I published my first book, I Woke Up After 20 Years, A Tale of Survival and Reconstruction. Part autobiography, part self-help manual, the book narrated my complete story, from dating William to founding the Institute, interspersed with practical guidance to identify and escape abusive relationships. To my surprise, the book became a national bestseller, remaining on the bestseller list for almost 6 months. The notoriety brought new opportunities and challenges. I was invited to television programs, radio interviews, lectures at universities across the country. Each public appearance was simultaneously exhausting and invigorating. Reliving my story never ceased to be painful, but seeing the impact it caused made the pain bearable, even meaningful. In 2005, I received news that deeply shook me. William had died in prison, victim of a heart attack. I received the information with a disconcerting mixture of emotions. There was no joy or satisfaction, as some might expect, nor was there forgiveness. I never reached that point. What I felt was mainly a profound relief, as if a shadow that constantly hovered in the periphery of my vision had finally dissipated. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with a cup of tea. Yes, ironically, I had reclaimed the ritual of tea for myself, now on my own terms and with my own choice of herbs. I reflected on the journey I had traveled since that July afternoon when I fled with Jennifer, the frightened 23-year-old girl who accepted the first cup of poisoned tea, the middle-aged woman who awakened to discover that 2 decades of her life had been stolen, the 67-year-old professional who now helped other women reclaim their own lives. All these versions of me coexisted, each with its scars and learnings. William had departed from this world, but his legacy of pain continued present, not just in me, but in all the other victims of men like him. My work, I realized while watching the steam rise from the cup, was far from over. In 2008, at 70 years old, I decided to reduce my hours at the clinic to dedicate myself more to the Institute and to a new project I had conceived, an educational prevention program for schools. Recognizing boundaries, building respect, brought discussions about healthy relationships, consent, and warning signs to teenagers even before they entered their first romantic relationships. It's easier to teach young people to recognize abuse than to help adults recover from it, I explained to school principals, many initially reluctant to address such delicate topics with their students. Gradually, however, doors opened. The program, initially implemented in just 3 schools in Richmond, expanded to more than 50 institutions throughout the state of Virginia in the following years. In 2012, I received a call that would once again change the course of my life. An international producer was interested in adapting my story for a film. My initial reaction was hesitation. Hollywood was known for sensationalizing real stories, and the last thing I wanted was to see my suffering transformed into cheap entertainment. After long negotiations, and with the guarantee that I would have an active voice in the script, I agreed to the project. I spent weeks in meetings with screenwriters and the director, a Brazilian filmmaker who had built an international career portraying stories of Latin American women. I insisted that the film should not be just about the horror I lived through, but mainly about the reconstruction that followed. 20 Years of Silence premiered at the Berlin Film Festival in 2014, receiving the jury prize and critical acclaim. The actress who portrayed me spent weeks with me, observing my mannerisms, listening to recordings of my lectures, absorbing not just my story, but my essence. Her performance was so authentic that, watching the film for the first time, I had moments where I seemed to be seeing myself on the screen. The film brought my story to a global audience. I received letters from women in Russia, India, South Africa, Japan, all sharing experiences terribly similar to mine, proving that psychological abuse knows no cultural or geographical boundaries. In 2015, at 77 years old, I published my second book, Beyond Awakening: Building a Society Without Silences. Less autobiographical and more focused on public policies, the book argued for the need for legal, educational, and cultural reforms to effectively combat domestic violence in all its forms. The launch coincided with my formal retirement from the clinic, although I continued actively involved with the Institute and with occasional lectures. Today, sitting here before you, sharing my story, I look back and see a path that I could never have imagined. The 20 years that William tried to steal from me didn't disappear into the void. They transformed into the fuel that propelled 3 decades of work in defense of other women. I don't consider myself a victim who survived, but a survivor who thrived. My life wasn't defined by the years of captivity, but by the freedom I conquered and what I did with it. With each woman I helped awaken from her own nightmare, I reclaimed a piece of the life that was taken from me. If you're watching me now and recognize your own situation in my story, I want you to know, you're not alone. You're not crazy. What's happening to you is real, and you deserve and can have a life beyond this. The first step is the hardest, but I promise that on the other side, there's an entire world waiting for you. For 20 years, I took sleeping medicine until I discovered what my husband did at night. But the real awakening wasn't on that morning when I finally understood what was happening. It was in each day that followed, in each choice I made to rebuild my life on my own terms. This is my story. This is my testimony. This is my legacy. And before I say goodbye, I want to ask you who are watching. If my story touched your heart, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone you think needs to hear this. Each view, each subscription, helps this message reach more people who might need exactly these words today. And again, I would love to know where you're watching from, so leave the name of your city in the comments. Thank you for listening. Your attention is part of my healing process, and I sincerely hope that something of what I shared today can illuminate your own path, whatever darkness you may be facing.